Hi, my name is Alexandra Ferguson. For the last 11 years, my company, also called Alexandra Ferguson, based in New York, has locally manufactured and sold decorative pillows with fun and bold phrases on them. Recently, Governor Cuomo put out a call to action to all the Garment City factories to help sew desperately needed supplies for the medical workers on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic in our hospitals. From there, I connected with a friend who is a registered nurse at the ICU in the Bronx, and I asked her, "What do you need? What can I sew for you?" She said, "The masks are destroying our ears. The skin back there is as sensitive as your eyelids, and hooking those masks around your ears is brutal for them to wear for 12-hour shifts." She described to me a headband with specially positioned buttons that you could hook the mask around instead of hooking them to your ears. If the masks aren't as painful to wear, then you won't cause a distraction and you won't be tempted to take it off the moment to get a moment of relief. It's a brilliantly simple solution. Within 24 hours, I delivered to her an initial set of 10 headbands with 50 more to follow for her whole department. Since then, medical workers have come out of the woodwork requesting headbands for their own departments. The volume is more than I can sew on my own, but it was a perfect project to send out to my professional seamstresses who are working from home. I set up a GoFundMe page to raise money for out-of-pocket costs like payroll and materials, and the response has been incredible. Thank you to anyone who has donated to our campaign so far. I had no idea what to expect, and I'm just blown away. So now it's time to hunker down and get these things made. Meanwhile, we heard from many of you from as far away as Canada who wanted to take the idea to their local community too. So here's a little tutorial of how we're making the headbands. First, we're going to cut the material. So the specs for our headbands are 15 inches by 6 inches wide, and then I taper them at the end. So right here I've got a stash of white jersey that I happen to have on hand and a quilting ruler. This is a simple tool, but you can measure out 15 inches by 6 inches. So as you might hear me saying a few different times, these are not couture headbands, these are functional headbands. And so we're cutting a lot of corners, but we're getting it done. So I'm just using the marker straight on the page here, and I'm measuring out 15 inches by 6 inches wide, and then I'm tapering it at the ends. So I'm cutting out little 3-inch by 1.5-inch triangles, which I'm just marking here. You're not going to see any of these pen lines on the final product because it's all going to be part of the seam allowance inside. And I imagine that these things are going to go through some pretty intense bleach washes, so it's all going to wash away eventually anyway. Is that 3 inches? That's 3 inches. Okay. I've got 8 layers of fabric stacked on top of each other here, which I just did from folding it nicely. You're gonna find that depending on the elasticity and recovery of your fabric, that your specs might have to be different. So while mine are 15 inches long, I've got pretty stretchy, goopy fabric here, and I would recommend testing your fabric, making a prototype or two to get your own specs to make sure they fit nicely. these triangles. All right, so here you see we've got 15 inches by 6 inches wide at the widest point, and we've tapered the ends. I've also got over here, this is binding elastic. It's really soft, it's really goopy, and this is going to go on the underside of the hairbands here. So I've cut these to be 4 inches long, and again, you're going to be measuring your own lengths based on the elasticity and recovery of your elastic. So 4 inches worked for this elastic, but you might want to test it out with whatever you have on hand. So I'm going to take one of these, I'm checking the face of the fabric, and I'm going to turn them inside out, and I'm going to place the elastic right there, and I'm going to fold this over on top. So I've got the wrong face of the fabric on the outside and the correct face of the fabric on the inside, and my elastic sandwiched in between at one end. I'm using roughly 1/2 inch seam allowances, but the nice thing about jersey material is that it's super forgiving and stretchy, so in order to work quickly, we're not measuring anything, but it's close enough. All right, so now I'm going to stitch around. Now you'll notice that I'm using a straight stitch machine with stretchy jersey fabric, and we're going to want these hairbands to really stretch around to be really comfortable. So a little trick if you're using stretch material is I'm going to pull that material really tight as it's sewing. So it's going to bounce back when I let go after it's been stitched, but this will allow the hairbands to stretch around. So you can use stretch material with a straight stitch sewing machine. So I'm just going to yank it and go around. Keeping that tension on the fabric so it stretches. Okay. So I have sewn along here and around the edge there, and I've left this part open. And I'm now going to turn this inside out. Hopefully I can find the end of the elastic in there. I'll use that to pull. Okay, there it is. So now I'm just going to smooth it out. I'm going to try to extend that along the seam. And there's our headband. The next step for sewing is we need to connect it on the other side. So the first step is I'm going to fold this edge back on itself. Again, roughly 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to tuck the end of the elastic in there, and now I'm going to stitch that down. Ta-da! And here we have our hairband. So you'll see that it's stretching nicely along the seam, and we have that there. So the next step is we need to sew the buttons on. The buttons is what makes them special. So we worked out that based on the stretch of our material that the buttons, which you want to be positioned right above where the ear is in order for the mask to position correctly, for us that was 2.5 inches up from the seam. So I'm just going to mark it right on there with a pen, 2.5 inches up from the seam. And the last step is to sew on the button. So here, when I sew on buttons, I thread the needle so that there's 4 strands of thread coming through. It's just kind of a shortcut I learned in fashion industry, so that we can get the button on there tight without having to go round and round so many times. And I've gone ahead and knotted it at the bottom. We're going to knot these buttons on really tight because we don't want them to pop off. I'm using really big buttons. Again, these things are replacing ears, so we don't want them to be too fiddly. So these buttons, 28 line, 36 line. Whatever you can get your hands on. One little trick we learned to knot the buttons is you can loop the string around there, hold that down. So we did one little knot. I'm going to include a shank here, and you make a button shank simply by wrapping that thread around. So that gives the button a little lift. I'll put that through there. I personally hate sewing buttons. I used to do too much of it at midnight before a fashion show, but we're going to sew a lot of them on now. So now I'm going to knot this again really tight. Okay, and of course you're going to sew a second button on the other side, but that's the idea. So then you've got that button there, just like the buttons here. And there you have it. So most of all, I want to say thank you to all of the medical workers that are out there fighting coronavirus. I read the accounts of what you guys are going through in the news, and it's just so intense, and my heart really goes out to you. And I say this for everyone who has donated to our campaign and have spoken to. We are just so in awe of what you guys are doing. These headbands are just a really small drop in the bucket, but we hope that it can bring you guys at least a little bit of comfort as you do your important work. If you would like to donate to our campaign, we're going to be manufacturing hundreds and hundreds of these. You can find it on GoFundMe.com. Just search for buttoned headbands for medical workers, and you will find us there. If you are a medical worker treating coronavirus patients and you would like to request headbands for your team, you can email me at info@alexandraferguson.com. Please include the name of the hospital where you are working and how many headbands you would like. And you can also follow us on Instagram. Our handle is @Alexandra Ferguson LLC. We're going to be posting any photos that come in of medical workers on the front lines wearing our headbands. So thank you again, everyone, and stay safe.